Hello, hello, hello. A very, very quick final Arvos of Harvo this year to wrap up my December reads. We did get through 100 books this year, and I am very, very tired. So I don't know if things are going to be quite as regimented next year. I do want to make a video reflecting on, I think now 3, maybe even 4 years of 100 books per year, what this has done to the way I view reading, and what I think my reading life might look like going forward into my later years. But just for this month, let's talk about only 5 books. So I didn't read a Shakespeare play this month. I looked at the list of plays still available, and I'll flick them up on the screen. None of them really sparked joy. I guess I'll finish this challenge next year. It's hard, because some of the last Shakespeare plays, they're just not that good. I just wonder, like, sometimes am I just reading for the sake of finishing things, and is that a worthwhile way to spend my time? I don't really know. But thankfully there are some books this month that I did quite enjoy. Starting off with something I'm also not sure about next year is finishing off the Booker Prize winners. Bain or Shuggie Bain, I'm not too sure what the pronunciation is, by Douglas Stuart, is a Scottish winner of the Booker Prize, and surprisingly the second from a Scottish author, the first being James Kelman's How Late It Was, How Late. Kind of shocking to me that a prize that was built around the English Commonwealth for 60 years has only had, I think, 1 or 2 Welsh winners, 1 or 2 Scottish winners. How does that really happen? I'm not too sure. But Shuggie Bain is about a young boy growing up in a very downtrodden area of Scotland. He is from a broken home. His father is a taxi driver who leaves his mother, who is addicted to alcohol. And it's very tragic the way this novel moves, because it shows the way that these expected relationships of mothers and fathers and sons and grandparents and communities, all of these end up failing this young boy. The expectations that we have of stable and loving families just don't function in this environment that's so affected by alcohol and so affected by violence and dispossession, that it is a really tragic story. And I have read some interviews from Douglas Stuart suggesting that there are a lot of autobiographical elements that have gone into a work like this, which to me does help with this sense of authenticity. The hard thing for me always, reading a book that is this tragic, is thinking, what am I supposed to do with this emotion, with this feeling? Because I think the novel's written well enough to the point that I do feel what the characters feel. I do get this sense that Agnes, who is really a victim of addiction and circumstance, she is a tragic figure, and I do feel very, very sympathetic towards her, even as this novel is so constraining to her circumstances. There's so limited hope in her circumstances. And similarly with the title character himself, it really seems to be a book about showing a character remaining soft in this otherwise very harsh and hard and masculine landscape. He is just subjected to so many terrible things, and it's hard for me to say, because I'm not really a big fan of sadness for the sake of sadness, even as I had to admit that I have myself enjoyed a relatively comfortable life. I think my family is not broken. We live in a part of the world that is very safe and very, very comfortable. So what do I do to vicariously experience someone else's suffering when this is all that was available to them? And then be able to close the book and say, but that's not my life, that's not what my world is like. It makes me wonder why a novel like this becomes so popular, why it is one of the rare Booker Prize winners that is on also bestseller lists, that's on the ABC 100, that people read in book clubs, that I'm pretty sure this edition even has book club questions at the end. Why? Like, do we like to read about people's misery? And what do we do with stories about misery? Does it make us feel more empathetic? Does it make us feel like we could have done something for a character like this? I just really don't know. But I put the book down and I just feel very helpless. And I think, why would you subject me to this? Is there something I can do? Or at least, what is the economic function of taking a story like this and selling it and making it go worldwide and making money off a very real story of suffering? I don't have the answer, and I wish I could speak more on that, but it's a pattern that I'm starting to see more and more and more, is that we just have these trauma novels, and I find it very easy to critique an author when they're writing about trauma and they haven't experienced it personally, or they're writing about somebody else's trauma. That's very easy to criticize. But when we have a story like this, when it is a personal story, and yet it's somehow, despite being picked up originally by a small press and being rejected by so many publications, it then just catapults into the cultural consciousness. It says something about the way that we read and what we want as readers, and it falls into, I think, this wider trend and conversation of deeply tragic novels that are literary because of how much they make the reader sad and how much they hurt the reader. I don't know. Am I giving this a rating for the book itself, the writing itself, or am I giving it a rating for the movement I think it falls into? Both of these I don't know. Am I giving it a rating for how much I enjoyed it? For how much I enjoyed it, or how much I think I gained from this, I think it's a 3 out of 5. I don't think it is particularly exceptional amongst the Booker Prize winners that I've read in its ability to change my worldview on things, or to make me feel more rewarded or fed for having read it. But it also just makes me very sad. It reminds me that the world shouldn't be like this. It reminds me that people like this should be protected and should have the, I don't want to say luxury, I should have the guarantee of lasting and safe love from the people they care about. Yeah, that's sad. Book number 2, My Something Spooky, Hell House by Richard Matheson. So I had originally wanted to do a comparison between Hell House and The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, because I am starting to look a bit at how do we structure a haunted house story in preparation for the novel that I'm currently working on, which is, I guess, in some ways a haunted house story. And I'm not going to do that anymore, because Hell House is not a very good book. It's very schlocky kind of haunted house, paint by numbers writing, and Richard Matheson is an author that I don't know if I respect. He's a very prolific kind of gotcha sci-fi type of author. He has very many famous stories in the Twilight Zone, short story magazines. Famously also wrote what is it called? I Am Legend or The Omega Man, whichever one is the book. I read that, I think, if not last year, then the year before, and I thought that book was fine. It was an action book, and it was a book where it really felt like it was being written and then published without ever read back a single time. Like, the stuff in the end of that book has no relevance to the beginning of the book, and it was totally fine. It was kind of so pulpy that it was meant to be read just one way through and never thought about any more deeply than that. And Hell House is, I guess, kind of like that as well. So a haunted house story, to me, I think does need this element of mystery. It needs the sense of, is it actually haunted, and what is it haunted by? Is it supernatural? Is it malignant? Is it regretful? How does the supernatural elements function, and how does it communicate with the people in the house, and what are they there for? So I guess that is what this is that it's 4 characters going into this very haunted house that previously was the site of orgies and lawlessness and debauchery, and the house has a reputation for having a negative psychological effect for anyone who goes into there. So we now have our de facto protagonist, who's a bit of a scientist. He has all these machines that he wants to set up to try and monitor paranormal activity in there, and he has this hypothesis that it's all just lingering energy in the atmosphere. So there is no agent that's doing the haunting. It's just the house itself is kind of restless. And he is significantly at odds with this female medium who's there, and she believes that the house is haunted by a number of figures, and the son of the house's proprietor, named Daniel, he is like a tragic figure trying to get out of it. And so because there's this disagreement about how the house is haunted, we have now these characters entering periods of extreme emotional angst, lashing out at one another, and also being quite subjected to general paranormal activity. Like, things go flying and voices go heard, there's ectoplasm and all of these, like, things that you expect from a ghost story. All of this is kind of taken at face value, so the book doesn't really need to try and convince you that this is real, because I guess the convention of a haunted house novel that Hell House uses is that you're reading a supernatural book, so it's just gonna happen. Like, shut up and enjoy the ride, right? Whereas something like The Haunting of Hill House, I think, respects its reader so much more that making a comparison is just completely moot. But this is a very exploitative book. I think that in addition to just being a book about people being really mean and nasty to one another and creating conflict for the sake of conflict, it's also really cruel to its female characters. It's really not above using sex and sexual desire as a fearful thing and equal parts titillating the reader and scaring them with the extremity of feminine sexual desire. It just doesn't rub well. And this is a pretty old book. I'm pretty sure it's from the 50s or 60s. Like, it definitely has the element of moral panic to it, and just nothing comes off well. It's bleak, but not for a meaningful way. It's bleak in the way that its characters are bad people and evil exists, and yeah, grosses you out. 2 out of 5. Don't read it. And so I was in a bit of a slump after that one. I wanted something that was quick and breezy and would get me through things, and I chose Heartburn by Nora Ephron. Nora Ephron is a writer and a director of film, very famous kind of public figure in New York at this time, 1980s and 1990s. I would say probably one of the most influential figures in the rom-com genre, creating films that I think are still very formulaic rom-coms, or at least genre-codifying rom-coms, but are held up today as kind of classics. And so Heartburn is a very, very autobiographical novel about Ephron's own marital situation. The narrator is pregnant at the start of the novel with the child of her husband who is cheating on her second husband. And the first husband, several years ago, was a relationship that also didn't work out. And so the degree of convoluted marital infidelity in this book is kind of beyond anything I know in my own personal life. Like, I do not know any relationships or people anywhere close to this level of just... Like, I don't want to judge people's relationship history, but it's hard not to talk about the complexity of the relationships of a book like this and just say, how did that happen? And I guess it's because people are complicated, and especially in the 1980s, 1990s in New York, it was a strange time, and people were really, I guess, working out what it meant to be in a relationship in a world that was changing so much, and in a city that had so many different influences weighing in on it, whether it was the economic or the political or the cultural, the idea of celebrity and being in the public eye, and all of these things coming together. It's tough, and I can see the appeal of a book like this to show a life that's so much more chaotic than what a regular person would experience, and to make some light of it. None of the characters come off well, but also they don't come off badly. I think everyone is treated quite kindly here. There are a few jokes at the expense of people's race and sexual orientation and gender that don't fly the best, but for the most part, I think the voice is still pretty kind. The stakes are not that high. I think the narrative voice is enjoyable. There is that kind of Jane Austen-y poke fun at people's vices here, and yet I didn't feel like I was being led in onto some cruel joke. I felt like the humanity of each of the characters was still a big priority, even though the actual relationships being discussed here were really messy. And so I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the whole process of reading it. I thought it was really easy to read, and I really liked the motif of recipes in there as well. I really liked the way that it talks about cooking as being this very methodical thing that doesn't need to mean anything. It's just a way of making time pass. But the beauty of cooking one dish over and over again, and it's just the same thing every time. The beauty of making food by recipes, I just really like that. So overall, a very enjoyable book for me. I give it a 4 out of 5. It's light and it's breezy. It's something that I would recommend very freely, because I think the stakes of liking or disliking a book like this is not very high. So yeah, I really enjoyed this. Next on my yearly challenge, so most of the years I still have left on this challenge are from the 1900s, like very first decade of the 1900s. And it's pretty hard to find books from this period that I actually want to read. So for this year I chose White Fang by Jack London. White Fang kind of goes hand in hand with The Call of the Wild. They're both novels about dogs. White Fang is kind of the reverse. So Call of the Wild is about a domestic animal that ends up having to prove itself in the Alaskan wilderness. And White Fang is sort of the reverse. White Fang is about a wild half-wolf that ends up a sled dog, and then a fighting dog, and then finally a house dog. So it shows this journey of domestication. And whereas The Call of the Wild, I think, endures for a lot of different reasons. It's a lot shorter, it's more of an adventure, and it has just been taught in schools a lot more, and that's why people still talk about it. White Fang has been forgotten, and for, I think, very understandable reasons. It's longer, and it's more episodic. It's at times a bit boring, I will admit, and as much as kind of action-y scenes about dogs fighting one another can create momentary excitement, it just doesn't really resonate with me in any sense, because a lot of this novel functions by talking about dogs as very different to human beings, and it has that kind of evolutionary biological angle to it, where the author's quite reluctant to anthropomorphize White Fang. It's not a kind of Odyssey novel like Watership Down, which I love, by the way, but White Fang is very much more like, there's animalistic urges in this half-dog, half-wolf, and there's just nothing that will stop him from doing that. So what kind of moral questions are there even to say? It's just stuff that happens. And so from that basis, I already kind of dislike it. But even... Okay, so this is something that I had to say with a lot of delicacy, because it's something that's interesting to me, and I hope that I can express this with the delicacy that it deserves. Because White Fang is, in many ways, a kind of white supremacist novel. And it's a novel written about white supremacy before the midway point of before World War II, where white people weren't critiquing white supremacy at all, really. And it's starting to help me understand the early kind of 1900s, 1910s, 1920s attitude towards abolition, and then eventually the civil rights movement. Before all of that, White Fang's a book where the journey from, and does represent First Nations characters and First Nations cultures and the way that they use domesticated animals first. And then it shows this ascending journey to, ascending in the sense like the plot journey of going from very rough and uncivilized white people that use dogs for sport and gambling, and then concludes with this very suburban San Francisco civilization. And the dog constantly refers to its owners as through this lens of dominance. It refers to them as gods, because they are just more powerful than the dog will ever be. And so to show this kind of ascending staircase where the final step is this, I'm just going to spoil the novel, this act of self-sacrifice to protect what the novel seems to see as the pinnacle of civilization, as in this suburban house with a white owner who lives in this very regimented society, and something like petty crime or like a break-in is an aberration to an otherwise peaceful way of living. That, to me, is only possible in a novel written around this year, where, around like the 1900s, where there's just no underlying critique of that kind of Übermensch narrative at all. And this is hard to talk about because I'm sure there's still a lot of people, white or otherwise, that view the journey of civilization as looking a lot like this, and continuing to celebrate a book about, I guess, domestication. But what is really crucial in the latter half of the 1900s and the early 2000s is that we are unpacking that narrative, and that we are criticizing the very underlying assumption that civilization and white civilization, Western knowledge and Western society leads us to the best place. So to read a book like White Fang, and to see this idea kind of very present there, like it's not something that you would need to do a dissertation to try and analyze, like it is very on the surface in a book like this. I don't think it was intentionally written to support it, but I think it is just a product of how people must have felt at the time, that even an action-adventure novel about a dog running away from the wilderness has this assumption just baked into the very core of it. It's interesting to see, and I guess it does do exactly what I hope this challenge would do, is help me see the evolution of ideas across time. Did I enjoy reading it? No, I really didn't. And do I think it's a good book? No. Do I think it's worth reading today? Also probably not. But is it an interesting cultural footnote of what I imagine the world would have thought at the time? Yeah, I think so. So I think it's interesting because a lot of the books I read from this era are now starting to reveal these assumptions. A Princess of Mars earlier this year, I had basically the exact same conversation that I had with White Fang. And so I see the patterns, I see it's interesting. But this book is a 2 out of 5. I would say I would rather not have read it unless for this challenge purpose. And lastly, because I want to, so I realized that I've actually never reviewed Gilead for this channel. Gilead is the book that I say is my favorite book of all time, and now having read it 5 years later, so Gilead was one of the first books that got me into reading at all. I was 25 at the time. I can't remember if I was working as a teacher or if I had just left, but I was in that period of my life where I thought, I identify as an English teacher. I trained to teach English for 5 years at uni, and then I worked for a year and a half, and then I thought, but I don't have a favorite book. I don't have a book that showed me what it meant to really love literature. And I took this recommendation from a friend of mine. It wasn't a direct recommendation, but it was something that I saw him often post about and talk about, a book that really helped him understand his own identity and he would go to again and again for comfort. And then I thought to myself, I just want to see what the fuss is about. And I remember just being on a train in 2020 reading this book and just being absolutely shocked that I could exist in the same universe as a book like this, that I could look up from the pages and see people around me and think, you guys live in a world where this book exists. How do you not comprehend how much beauty can exist? It was just an utterly mind-blowing moment, and I'd never been transformed by the act of reading literature quite like that. So I think I had a lot of devotion for this book, and then I set it aside and never looked at it again. Every now and then, maybe I'd flick to a few pages for inspiration, but I never read the whole thing through. And the summary of this is that it is about a preacher in Iowa, a town called Gilead, which is this little small country town near Kansas, and he's reflecting on all the various moments of his life, writing a letter to his 7-year-old son, even though he's 70 at the time of the book. And he's reflecting on the fact that he's never actually going to be able to watch his son grow up. He's not going to be able to be the dad that he would want to be for his son. And so, in its stead, he decides to write these letters to try and communicate all the wisdom that he's accumulated from these years, to kind of lament on the fact that he has fallen very short of what he wants for his life to have been. He recognizes that he's often been quite jealous, and he's not always reconciled the conflicts that he has with the people around him the best. But he's also really, really enjoyed life, and that life is worth living. Life is very beautiful. Life contains so many incredible things, and there is, if you stop and look carefully, just unspeakably bright beauty in everything. And so it is a religious text as well. It does reflect on theological notions of Calvinism. We have the preacher who is, I believe he's Baptist, because his best friend John Borton is Presbyterian. And so there are points where there are conversations about doctrine that you do kind of have to be like clued into really niche church topics to really appreciate. Like, there's conversations early on about baptism and about full immersion versus sprinkling and what all of that means. And even I don't, like, having gone to church for many years of my life, I could still not tell you exactly what all of that means. So it does get a bit niche. I don't think it's necessary to understand all of these, but it does give a lot of texture to this novel. I think the three core plot elements of this novel, though, that make it all so beautiful to me, is that the first one is the generational story between the grandfather, the father, and the narrator. All three are preachers, and different kinds of preachers. The grandfather was this really firebrand kind of character because he was preaching during the American Civil War, and one of his attitudes was that he believed in abolition, and he preached a message that encouraged men to enlist in the war, to actually fight for the freedom and the abolition of slavery, to fight for the freedom of African American people. And his son, the father of the narrator, was a pacifist, and so he preached this message that peace was good in all circumstances. He was influenced by World War I, and he thought that it would be a great tragedy for America to send a full generation of young men to fight this battle in Europe. And then lastly, we have the narrator, who has a much more personal attitude towards this. He talks a bit about the sermons he gives, but he's not quite as candid about them as he is about the sermons of his grandfather and his father. Instead, he talks a lot about his personal life and his history. So he's a man who, from a young age, was raised and knew he was going to be a pastor. He married someone young and had children that didn't survive very long, and his first wife didn't either. And so he lives this period of grief where he fulfills his calling as a preacher, but there's not a whole lot of joy in it. And then one day he meets someone in his congregation later into his life, and then has the son who he's writing this letter to. And so that leads him into quite a unconventional life that doesn't match the very stereotypical narrative that I guess a religious man might meet. And so these letters reflect that kind of wisdom that he's gained from living a life that's a bit different from what we'll expect. That's kind of the first narrative. The second narrative, the first and second, the first one is the grandfather-father, the second one is the two marriages, and then the third one is about his friend Borton, and Borton's son, who is named after him. The narrator's name is John Ames, and so Borton names his son John Ames in honor of his best friend. And John Ames Borton, named Jack, ends up being just a absolute terror of a person. He plays pranks in the neighborhood and then graduates to doing misdemeanors and then significant crimes. He eventually becomes the town's scapegoat for all the bad things that happens. He ends up getting a young woman pregnant, and then the child he kind of abandons. And this is something that the narrator is just completely unable to forgive. Imagining this person who's lost his children and watches someone named after him give absolutely no care or significance to the act of being a father, which is the one thing that John Ames really wanted. And this leads to just unbelievably poignant reflections on morality and forgiveness, and just some of the most painful sentences, like painful in a good way, like cosmically significant sentences I've ever read in literature. Like, what I really want from my writing, and this is very inspired from this book, is to get to a point where the writing is so emotional that the vocalization of the words in my head is just being screamed. It's just at the top of my lungs, like the amount of emotion held in those words. I'm not gonna do it because I feel like it's a bit trite, but like I know what pages do that to me. I could flip to them right now and trigger the tears because it's just so well done. And it just makes you feel the weight of everything, not just like the joy and the suffering of everyone that's ever existed, all in one paragraph. It's just so good. And so there are 3 more novels in this series that follow on. We have Home, which when I started reading Gilead the second time, I thought Home might actually be better, because Home is about Jack, and Jack is a character that I identify with a whole lot more than anybody else in this whole series. Jack's story is so beautiful, and Home made me cry just unbelievably. Whereas I think the first time I read Gilead, I didn't cry. But now, I think the best novel is Gilead, having read through all 4 novels first. So read Gilead, Home, Lila, Jack, and then Gilead on the second reading is the best. Is just absolutely, like, it feels like everything that comes after this novel was written with the knowledge that it would be necessary to make this novel better than its original incarnation. It's just so unbelievably good. And I think too, me being older helps. So when I first read this novel, I was 25. I still had time in my life to think, what do I want to be and who am I? What are my characteristics? What are my virtues? What are my weaknesses? I still didn't really know. And I didn't have at that point a lot of choices I'd made where I could think, oh, I can't go back on that anymore. And both my grandparents were still alive. Both my grandfathers were still alive as well. I had not had a significant death in anyone close to me kind of rock my life at that point. And I also hadn't been aware of the various mental health, or like, I guess, more aware of the various mental health concerns that I guess will probably stay with me for the rest of my life. And now that I'm 31 and I'm reading this book again, and all of those things that I said I didn't have before, I've experienced now. It makes the novel more relevant. It makes the things that these characters experience remind me of things that I've experienced. And it helps me process some of those emotions, but it also brings them up to the forefront again. It makes me feel the sadness of losing my grandfather again. It makes me feel kind of the injustice of my friend passing away so young again. You can kind of see my hand trembling right now, even, like, I'm getting really, really emotional. It's just a really, really good book. I don't know what else to say, but yeah, this is my Because I Wanted To. This is my #1 book of all time. I hope it continues to be. Even as I continue to wrestle with ideas of my identity and my faith, and who knows who I will be in 1 year, and 5 years, and 10 years. I've just learned so much from this book, and yeah, I hope it continues to be special to me. On the flip side, putting that aside, it'd be pretty cool if I would one day read a book that to me was somehow even more special than this. That would be crazy, because this, like, it's crazy to say that there's a book in my life that I don't think will ever be surpassed. But what if that book gets surpassed? Right? Anyways, that's my Books of December. Thank you for joining. This has been a interesting reading year. I think I may be stagnating or falling into a bit of a pattern with my kind of reading life, so I wonder what I'll do next year. I think I may try to... Like, the original plan for next year was just finish some of these reading challenges, and then the year after, start reading books that I want to read. But this was a year of also finishing reading challenges, and I didn't feel that inspired by it. Like, there's definitely months where, even though I had a category of books that I read because literally I just wanted to, I'm not enjoying reading as much as when I started, I think. So I wonder what next year's going to look like. Maybe I'm going to reduce my reading goal to something like a bit more manageable, like a 60 or a 70. Maybe I will make more videos about reading rather than just reviewing books. And I will have to take my writing more seriously next year, so there's that as well. But there'll be changes, and I'm welcoming changes. I'm hoping that I'll continue to learn and grow, and some of these things on my shelf will get read through. And yeah, that's all there is to say, I guess. Have a happy New Year, everyone.